In some of my earliest memories watching the Viking, I'm talking little kid, like fuzzy, barely remember it. The one thing that stands out, and how couldn't he, is John Randle. Let's talk about him here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today's going to be John Randle Day. I'm going to talk about John Randle all day, and it's going to be very fun because it's John Randle. But first, there's a couple of housekeeping things that I want to go over. I want to talk about Friday's show where I did the all-22 all-time roster, 22 starters exercise. Some interesting thoughts that, I don't know, I just kind of want to follow up on. And also, quick heads up, if you are a YouTube viewer, the show will not be on YouTube for a couple weeks. I'm going out of town. Where I want a video capability, but the show will still be on audio. So if you're Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, things will be daily as normal. Might sound a little different. I actually have no idea how it's going to sound at where I'm going, but yeah, so that's something to be aware of. But let's talk about the 22 person list. If you want to listen to the whole thing, I encourage that you do. I had a lot of fun making that one, but there were, I guess, three things that people responded to three things that people really disagreed with. The first was me including Chuck Foreman over Adrian Peterson. I kind of stick to my guns on that. I do acknowledge, Adrian Peterson had a better career than Chuck Foreman did. And that's not what I was saying by putting him on the list. It was purely like versatility of skill set. Adrian Peterson couldn't function out of the passing game, and if I'm making a team, and I'm making a team in 2022, I just can't have that, even though he's like a total home run hitter. If you wanted to use the same logic on him that I used on Paul Krause, who kind of has the same problem where his game didn't age to really fit what's going on in football today, but he was such an interception machine that it was worth it anyways, and if you want to say, well, Adrian Peterson can kind of house anything and that's worth it, then sure, but just keep in mind, you're making a team that runs 70% of the time, that has to do famine, feast, and give him, 30 carries a game. Do you want to do that in 2022, especially with an offense that has, Fran Tarkenton and Randy Moss and Chris Carter on it? Do you really want to do that? So I'm sticking to my guns on Chuck Foreman. The other thing people didn't like was, I didn't get this one a lot, but there were a couple people that really were surprised that I put Xavier Rhodes in over Carl Lee. Or not having Carl Lee in general, but Xavier Rhodes would be the one that I would cut if I did put in Carl Lee. And I feel kind of the same. It's really close to me, and I think I barely edged in on Xavier Rhodes just because, I don't know, I just thought his peak was a little bit higher than Carl Lee's, but it's one of those things you could absolutely talk me into Carl Lee. So I don't know, try to talk me into Carl Lee over Xavier Rhodes. You'll probably be able to do it. And then the one thing that people really got upset about was no John Randle, partially why I'm doing a John Randle episode today. But I reiterate that, again, I'm trying to make a complete team, and having two smaller, quicker, undersized defensive tackles is kind of a recipe for disaster, even if those guys are Alan Page and John Randle. You have a great pass rush, but they won't have to pass ever. They just double team and knock you out all day. Like Alan Page had Gary Larson, John Randle had Henry Thomas. And so I went with Henry Thomas, and I maintain you got to have a big guy. However, one person in the YouTube comments, I'm sorry, I forget your name, so thank you for this, said Pat Williams. And that's the guy. It's Pat Williams. So I will make that change, and I will cede that. Good call. Let's move on to John Randle. What do you know about John Randle? I'm curious as to where people are going in, because if you're older and you just watched him play, what do you remember about what sticks out about John Randle? Was it the eye black that he would always wear? Was it the way that he was always talking a bunch of trash? Was it that he was an undrafted guy and an undersized defensive tackle that kind of carved out more of a career than ever should be possible? What is it about John Randle that sticks out to you? And I'll tell you everything, and so hopefully I can flesh that out a little bit more. If you're younger than me and you don't really remember, or you were too young to remember, then gather around, kids. For me, what stuck out about John Randle was the persona, the crazy guy on the field, getting all kinds of sacks, the cool eye black, to 6-year-old Luke. That was the raddest thing in the world. Like he was a hero. He was awesome. And my heart wept because at the end of his career, they like standardized the way you could paint your face because the NFL is weird like that, and they standardize how high your socks can be and stuff. And so they decided that he can't do the eye black anymore. And my heart just broke. I loved that. The story behind it is just that he and a couple of teammates one day were just like messing around with face paint before a game, and he thought it was stupid. They were doing like colors and like weird stuff, and he kind of was like, "We're painting our face. This is kind of dumb." But he also kind of wanted to be included, so he was just like, "I don't know, hand me the black," and he just took the black and he just sort of like smeared it haphazardly around his eyes. And the teammates looked at him and they were like, "Dude, that looks awesome. That's super badass." And he went in, and if I remember, like he like had a really good game that day, and he like felt really a lot more confident. And so he comes back the next game, and he's like, "All right, where's the paint? Let's do this." And his teammates were like, "What? We were just kind of messing around for one. Well, we didn't really feel like we were going to do that the whole season." But he kept doing it. And that kind of became part of his like image. Like when you envision John Randle, either you envision him as like an alumni because you just watched him announce the 2022 schedule, and you picture him from that, or you envision him on the field with raccoon eyes, looking like he's about to try to like rob the Justice League, or that he decided to pursue a life of crime in The Sims. and I love that. It's so cool. I just love how badass it is. But the reason that persona came out is, I think, what is most compelling to me about John Randle. And it's not that he was small, but he still got sacks. We've seen a lot of guys like that. It's not that he, how dynamic he was very cool, but that's not what sticks out to me. And so I want to tell you about that story and tell you why he speaks to me so personally, which is, all I can share with you. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. If you want to bet on today's Vikings, you can do that today. You can gamble on anything. You can bet on fights. You can bet on WNBA or MLB. Go bet on the Twins if you want, if you hate yourself. But you can also bet on the Vikings. How many wins are they going to get? Are they going to make the playoffs? Where do they finish in the division? You can bet that, I think they'll be third in the you can gamble on that. You can make that bet, or bet second. That's what I would do, is that I think they'd be second because the Bears and Lions are pee-pee poo-poo. But you can gamble on whatever. You can even bet on week one. Head on over to betonline.net for all of that. They have a player props builder where you can build all sorts of degenerate parlays. I know you all love to do that. And you can even bet right in the middle of a game with their live betting apparatus. You can even go to betonline.net, go to their live betting thing, see live updates of the game, and really try to place your gamble right when the right time, right when the value is highest. So head on over to betonline.net. You find all of that stuff. BetOnline, where the game starts. If you want to see players play the absolute hardest, that's what you're looking for. If you're looking for maximum effort, it's not in the playoffs. It might not even be in the Super Bowl. Certainly not in the regular season or in a do-or-die game or rivalry games or anything like that. You go to the final preseason game. I love the final preseason game because to me, it's like the finale of a reality show. You get to see all these people we've been following, and usually I've done the Storytime series and stuff. Won't be like that this year because we're doing history, but it's still like you feel so much closer to all these people. You watched them all camp. You've got to know people. You got, oh my God, that German kid we're all excited about. Is he going to make it? You have something, and I love it. But mostly I love it because the other team has the exact same thing. And all the players who have ostensibly made the team are usually out. So you're not getting a preview of the team, and that's what people usually want out of the preseason. They want to be like, ooh, how does Justin Jefferson look this year? But for me, the intrigue is in those people on the roster bubble. Those people whose entire careers, entire football playing lives, and they've done it their whole life. People have been playing football since they're 7 years old, and it's been everything to them. And that dream could end if they don't play well enough tonight against the third string Cincinnati Bengals, or whoever it's going to be. That is so compelling. And what you will find is players who are maybe not as good, but are playing harder than anything you'll ever see. They are playing their asses off because they know that if they don't work harder than they've ever worked in their life, it's over. And it might be over anyways, but they're going to give it 150%. There's no other choice, and I love that. And that is how John Randle played every single game. John Randle came up in unbelievable poverty. I mean, like jaw-dropping poverty. Watch his A Football Life, the docuseries. They did an episode on him, and they recreated on a soundstage his childhood home. Now, his childhood home it looks like a tool shed. It is like 20 by 20 foot. It looks like it is literally like where you would keep the tractor on a farm. It's barely. I've seen bigger parking spaces. I've seen bigger bathrooms. It's just tiny and out of the way on a cotton farm in Mumford, Texas, a town which you absolutely haven't heard of unless it involves John Randle specifically. There's like 127 people in it, and it's way out of the way, rural, nowhere, Texas. And he grew up raised mostly by a single mother, with him and his brothers. Now, thankfully, he and his brother Irvin were good enough at football. They kind of get lifted out of poverty, that whole thing. But John Randle wasn't always like a crazy athlete. You know, some of these kids you get like, oh my God, they were born so big and they were the biggest people in the world. And, you always knew they were going to play football. John Randle, for a lot of his childhood, because of a birth defect, had to wear like braces, like body braces. And he couldn't be in athletics at all. And it wasn't until he kind of finished growing, I think, not until high school, that he could actually get in. And because of that, he ended up having to, he didn't get a big scholarship. And I mean, look, this is out of the way Texas in the 80s. You're going to get looked over by a lot of people. A lot of people won't even hit you, won't even find you, even though you're good. And he ends up going to Trinity Valley Community College, playing there for a couple of years, and then he has to go to Texas A&I. Now, at Texas A&I, he was a superstar, but we've all been through draft cycles, right? We know the draft process. We remember draft season and how you go, oh, yeah, that guy's good, but he went to NDSU. Is that a big enough school? And Texas A&I, school you never heard of. Superstar there is just not going to get drafted. And so he didn't. And he ended up, 1990, he was not drafted. And it took Denny Green kind of giving him that chance. But I always have to, when I hear these stories, or when I tell these stories about, kid in poverty, kid or somebody like Alexander Madison grew up in San Bernardino, super rough part of town, and football sort of was his avenue to a better life. And when I tell that story, I always have to mention, those are the lucky ones. And there are a lot of people like John Randle with just as much work ethic, maybe even more athletic talent, better size and all that stuff, that don't make it for one reason or another because, they were sick the day the scout came to Trinity Valley Community College, or they were injured that day, or, they just didn't have their best day that day. And even though they maybe are better, it's like it takes a certain degree of luck. Those are the lucky ones. That there are a lot of factors that can make it so a kid with all the talent, all the work ethic in the world, all the merit, just doesn't make it, just doesn't get seen by the right scout, just makes his best play when the guy isn't looking, or maybe he's injured or sick that day. And when there's only one scout that's going to come to Trinity Valley Community College, what if you had something going on, or you happened to be on the other side of the field and you got missed because they were there to watch someone else? That sort of story, I think, is something we just can't take it for granted. There's all these stories like Chris Carter and Randy Moss both have in their hometowns, the corner where all the failed athletes hang out and drink beers. That is the normal outcome, even though it probably doesn't deserve to be, and it's just worth pointing out. But when John Randle gets to the game, he takes all of this as a chip on his shoulder, and he played like he didn't think he should be there, well beyond when that was an appropriate thing to think about John Randle. He was his own biggest detractor, and that merits talking about. We'll get into it. First, let me talk to you about your car. Let's make sure you're taking care of that thing. If you've got a light on, if you're hearing a funny noise, take that thing in. And I know it's going to be expensive, so let me help you out with that. They're going to try to upsell you for one of those car parts. If you need a new part, they're going to charge you 30, 50, even 100% more for that. Instead, go to rockauto.com. Enter your make, your year, and your model, and you can get that part delivered directly from your door, a lot of times from the exact same factory that they're buying from. Same thing off the same assembly line. You're just cutting out the middleman, bring them the part and say, hey, can you just install this? I'll just pay you for the labor, and you'll probably save a buck. So head on over to rockauto.com. You can get all sorts of stuff for your car. If you're a DIYer, you change your own oil, you can get motor oil of any kind. You can get whatever, and if you're really like a super fixer-upper, you can get anything under the sun there, or you can just get like jumper cables, stuff everybody needs in their car. You can find all of that stuff at rockauto.com. And in the How You Heard About Us section, make sure you let them know that Locked On sent you, because if you don't, the Rabbits will irresponsibly purchase and use fireworks in states where that is not legal. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. If you listen to John Randle talk about his career, and like, people ask, well, what made you so, what was the key? Why were you so good despite being so small? And he was way too small to be a defensive lineman. He went to 2 training camps, and they both tried to move him to linebacker. Very much like, if you remember, the Hercules Mataafa situation, super mirrored that. They tried to move him to linebacker, and he tried, and it totally didn't work, and he didn't make either of those teams. And then he goes to the Vikings with Jerry Burns kind of on his last leg. I believe that was his second to last season. Jerry Burns is second to last season, and he goes to the Vikings, and they let him be him, which is kind of a Bud Grant thing, let you be you. The same thing that unlocked, Paul Krause, that's handed down through Jerry Burns and is now affecting John Randle. 2 separate Paul Krause references in this one. Pretty dope. But that's where he sort of became the superstar that he is. But all that stuff, everything, go back to the back brace, to the community college resume, the size, getting cut twice, where he always understood, I was only supposed to be in camp for 3 weeks and be cut. I was supposed to be a camp body. I'm not supposed to be here. And it motivated him, and it made him work harder, and it made him, he was one of the only defensive linemen you'll ever see never take a play off. Most defensive linemen, the big boys, they need to come off and have a breather. At some point in the game, they need rest snaps. John Randle never did. It's why he has that persona. It's why he'd work himself into a frothing rage on the sideline every game, where you found him pre-game in his little ritual where he would just like say nonsense to himself and yell at himself, and he'd be hitting himself on the head, and he looked completely certifiably crazy. That wasn't John Randle. That was just what he had to do. If you talk to John Randle now, he's like a pretty ho-hum guy. Like, he's kind of quiet. He's like he's not like the liveliest dude in the room necessarily, but he's like very kind, and he's a good listener, and he's a good father. And he's like just kind of a dude. But on this field, he was insane. It's like this totally different person in that football life. His wife talks about it, and he's like, yeah, I know the real John Randle. The football John Randle is nothing like the real John Randle, and that contrast is so stark. And the reason he has to do that is because he feels like if he didn't, he wouldn't have made it. He wouldn't be, and maybe that's right. Maybe that attitude was part of it. But to me, it sounds familiar. It sounds like something that I personally have struggled with a lot, which is imposter syndrome. Maybe a lot of you have it too. Imposter syndrome, if you're unclear, is just, it's not an actual, I don't think it's a thing you diagnose with. It's just the word for when you kind of feel like you accidentally faked your way in, and at any minute, people are going to catch on that you really don't know what you're doing. A lot of people feel this at work. It's a really common thing. And I mean, the reasons for it for John Randle are because of his upbringing and all the things he had to overcome. And it's very clear. And it's, I mean, my upbringing and John Randle's upbringing were so different, but imposter syndrome doesn't really care about that. And I don't know, when we look at athletes and the impact that they have on us, that impact a lot of times is informed by what they have in common with us. I mean, how many of you fish and get super excited when you see Justin Jefferson post a picture of him with a fish on a boat on a lake? I mean, he's just like me for real, and I don't know, something about that cuts like really deep, that even John Randle, one of the most fearsome, Brett Favre said he was the scariest dude on the field. One of the best trash talkers, one of these like totally larger than life personalities. Not even he is immune to the idea that, man, I don't even really deserve to be. I mean, he was winning all pros, Pro Bowls, and he still thought, if I take a play off, they might cut me. I'm not supposed to be here. I didn't make it, really. I'm just kind of barely hanging on by a thread. I mean, he was like the greatest dude in the league, and he didn't believe it. And I think that's what he really needed, was somebody to believe in him. Because when he joined the team in 1990, he was a backup for a couple years. It wasn't until Denny Green got in that he really got the chance. And that's what Denny Green did. He gave people a chance. He believed in people. And he didn't just say, I believe in you, in that way that like a Teach for America person goes into some country in Africa and says, I believe in all you kids, and then goes home to, suburban Wyoming. No, he really believed in you. And you knew it, and you could tell, and it's what Chris Carter needed. He needed someone to believe in him and be in his corner, to get over his addiction. You know, it's what Randy Moss needed, someone to just be in his corner. Nobody was in his corner growing up, and he needed someone in his corner to really believe in him, and then he could be himself, and then he became the superstar. And John Randle just needed someone to believe in him, and Denny Green did. And he got on the field, and then he was completely insane, and he had the Hall of Fame career that he had. Sometimes that's all you need. And I don't know, that it just speaks to me on a personal level, and that's kind of what sports can be at their best, you know? Like it or not, athletes are this day and age's superheroes. And they're real life superheroes. They're larger than life figures that do things that we could only dream of being remotely close to capable of. And they're huge personalities and people that all the kids look up to, and they all get, their toys and stuff. They're superheroes. And I think sports at its best can show us that whatever ails us is not something that can stop everyone. And if it can't stop everyone, maybe it can't stop you. I don't know. Maybe that's going way too deep on just a dude that played in the 90s. But John Randle overcoming that nagging feeling that he doesn't belong there, finding whatever way he could, and fighting that hard through it, it's hard not to be inspired by it. A deeper conversation than maybe I thought I'd be getting into today. But that's what made John Randle so cool. One parting shot here, I should probably talk about the trash talk, because the trash talk was awesome. And the thing about John Randle's trash talk that everybody should know, if you don't already, is that he researched it. He would go to the media guide and he'd look up the names of your daughters, and then he would evoke that in his tree. He'd be like, "Hey, Aubrey and Allison, how are they doing before a play?" And you'd be like, "How the hell does he know my daughters' names?" It was the dopest thing in the world. He'd just look at the media guide, he'd do his research, and it would really throw people off, to the point where, very famously, he got Trent Dilfer thrown out of a game. He trash talked him so hard, he had Trent Dilfer so tilted that after a hit that it could have felt a little late, wasn't a late hit, wasn't flagged or anything like that. I don't think it was flagged. Trent Dilfer got up and went on top of John Randle, who had not gotten up from the tackle yet. Gets on top of him and starts trying to punch him, helmet still on. And Trent Dilfer gets ejected from the game. He got a quarterback thrown out of the game for being too rough, for unnecessary roughness on John Randle. That's how he got into your head. It was very, very dope. And it's a much more fun note to end the show on. I will see you all tomorrow. I will do a show tomorrow, even though it means I'll have to record on July 4th. I'm okay with that. So send me your questions. There's a Google form in the show notes. There's an email address, lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. You can also send it to me. I'll put out a call on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can also send it to @LockedOnVikings on Twitter. I will see you all tomorrow. Hope y'all have a happy 4th. And as always, Skol.